what is the norm of the archetypal person that is accepted as high status, high power. And that is normally someone with Western education or Western heritage, or at least speaking Western languages. And around that, there are assumptions that are made of either gendered roles or racialized roles. And there's a huge lack of understanding of the local cultural norms, or the I guess I'd call it advantage blindness of those. And this is so normal. If we have advantages, we don't see our own advantages. But if we don't have them, then we're hugely aware of not having them. So largely the people I spoke with don't have these advantages, and so they're really aware of them and they called them out.
Welcome to Narrative's Leadership Story Talks, where great leaders go beyond the bottom line to create lasting impact. Join hosts Jerome Deroy and Julienne Ryan as they uncover the stories behind real-world challenges, offering practical insights to help you lead with empathy, authenticity, and purpose. Each episode dives into how leaders use storytelling to build trust, foster connection, and inspire action. Whether you're navigating workplace dynamics, driving change, or building high-performing teams.
Welcome to Leadership Story Talks. Hi, I'm Jerome Deroy, CEO of Narrative.
And I'm Julienne Ryan, and it's great to be here.
Great to see you again, Julienne. Really lovely to be back. So before we move on to introducing our guest, I want to remind our listeners to subscribe to the podcast, leave a review wherever you find your podcasts, and also check out our YouTube channel at Narrative, because that's where you'll find a lot of our episode notes, and you'll find our archive, our entire archive of more than 100 episodes on narrative.com/podcast. So without further ado, today, our guest is Sona Sherratt, a returning guest, I should say. Sona is a faculty member at Ashridge, where she designs, teaches, and client directs on several executive education programs with clients such as SAB Miller, Swarovski, Heineken, Erste Group Bank, Avis, Beasley Insurance Group, and Continental, and many, many others. I've had the distinct pleasure of working with Sona and her team in that context. She's also designed and delivered senior leadership and general management programs for clients around the world. She was born in India and has lived and worked in the US, Spain, and the UK. Before joining Ashridge in the UK, Sona worked in sales, marketing, and HR for AstraZeneca UK and for Nortel Networks, covering Europe, Middle East, and Asia Pacific regions. She's also co-authored a book called 50 Biggest Management Dilemmas Solved, which was published by Pearson in January 2014. And she's currently a doctoral candidate at the University of Cambridge. I could say much more, but we're going to learn more about Sona right now. So welcome to the show, Sona.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. So I wanted to, one of the things that as I said in the intro, I had the pleasure of doing a small part of one of those leadership programs that you designed for your clients in the context of Ashridge and that sort of executive education programs, and that's how we met. And then we invited you onto the podcast, and I remember we had a conversation around the state of work and what was going on in the world at that time, which was in 2022, I believe, just about 2 years ago. And more recently, we were just rediscussing some of these topics with Julienne and thought of you and thought it would be a great time to invite you back and really kind of hear what you've been seeing and what you've been hearing. And one of the things that really struck me when we were preparing for this was, the number of hours that you spent interviewing people about their lived experiences in the context of your doctoral studies. And so I wondered if you could maybe start by telling us, what are your doctoral studies about? As a reminder, I know we talked a little bit about it in our previous episode, but maybe just giving the background for that and what you learned from these, many hours of interviews with people.
Of course, happy to do that. Okay, so my work at Cambridge started about 4 years ago, and the full title, I feel it sounds a bit too much, but I'll say it anyway. It's called How Unwritten Organizational Rules Impact Women and Minorities' Experiences of Psychological Safety. So, what I did was deliberately choose three very different global industries. So, three organizations where their mandate or what their purpose is very, very different. And I really wanted to understand people's experiences of psychological safety. So, what creates it and what takes it away, why they want to stay, and what frustrates them and makes them feel dissatisfied, but also this thing around unwritten rules, which I've really been fascinated by. This idea of what are the things that we don't talk about, cultural norms that really impact people in terms of what creates power, who gets heard, how does someone have status, what are the norms in organizations that really aren't written down anywhere, but drives the way the organization lives and breathes.
And so what was the what were the findings around these unwritten rules? Because I mean that must have been a very sort of, titanic sort of endeavor to be able to get into what is unwritten as opposed to what's right there in the protocols, the procedures, et cetera. How do you even go about figuring that out?
Yeah. So there are lots of sort of unwritten rules, as you might imagine, but let me just highlight a few which
Mm,
are consistent across these three very different organizations. So uh, there are 90 hours of interviews, and then I invited people to write a letter to their younger selves,
mm,
and about half of the people did that. So the stories that came out are absolutely beautiful. They're stunning.
mm,
And some of what people were saying is that there is an astonishing similarity in organizations in terms of what is the norm of the archetypal person that is accepted as high status, high power. And that is normally someone with Western education or Western heritage, or at least speaking Western languages. And around that, there are assumptions that are made of either gendered roles or racialized roles. And there's a huge lack of understanding of the local cultural norms or the I guess I'd call it advantage blindness of those. And this is so normal. If we have advantages, we don't see our own advantages. But if we don't have them, then we're hugely aware of not having them. So largely the people I spoke with don't have these advantages. And so they're really aware of them and they called them out. So this idea of having a similar background and those people with similar backgrounds having higher status, I think people who didn't have that wanted to address that and call it out.
mm, mm. That makes so much sense. And how pervasive is that? I mean, I know that you focused on three organizations, but I also know that you've got a wealth of experience, as we read in your bio, in terms of working in organizations and then educating executives. But how pervasive is this idea that we tend to have a lens that is Western centric in these organizations, and as a result, I would imagine that, the result is that many people feel excluded because that's not where they come from. I mean, is that fairly common?
So many things are going on in my head, and I guess the biggest thing I would say, and which surprised me the most, is every single person I spoke with who was a minority, so a person of color, an ethnicity that isn't a Western ethnicity, absolutely was aware that they were not the norm, and
Mm,
the experiences or the stories that underscored that or really showed me that they had experienced that was pervasive.
mm,
What was interesting is that women tended to they tended to share far less about their experiences of having gendered norms. And as I started to look into that in terms of research, what comes up, and this is very recent in my reading, is that society. It is so pervasive, gendered norms, that we tend not to think about them, and yet we speak a lot about D&I from a person of color
mm,
perspective. So,
mm,
and even women tend to accept the roles or the norms that they have been put into. And
mm,
on the whole, we tend to fit into those norms at the age of around 4, 5, or 6. So it's very early in life that we begin to put people into boxes of, this, to a 4 or 5-year-old, think of a leader and they'll come up with male norms, for example, or male names.
yeah.
Whereas, think of a nurse and they'll come up with female names. That happens really early on.
Mm. Gosh, that's fascinating. You know, this just reminded me of the prompt that you used, in terms of asking people to tell something to their younger selves, right? Am I
Mm,
hopefully, well, maybe you
mm,
can restate how you said that, but I love at Narrative, obviously, we're all about storytelling, so we love
mm.
prompts to get people to
Yeah.
tell stories. But I think that's really fascinating to ask about one's younger self. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about how did you come up with that idea of asking people about their younger selves and yeah, what was the incentive
Yeah.
to ask that?
So a few things here. One is that what I'd hoped is that a lengthy interview would create trust. So it was really important that I did that first with each
Mm,
of my interviewees so that they understood that what we were trying to explore, I wouldn't breach confidentiality, that I empathized with what they had experienced in some shape or manner with what I had experienced. So I did a lot of my own sharing to try and create that trust. And then what I was trying to do was have them reflect. So I asked people to write down a little diary or notes for themselves. So once they had kind of uncovered in the interview some of, kind of free flow conversation, I hoped that reflexivity would help them to get to a deeper level. And
mm,
through this idea of kind of what have you seen, heard, experienced in anything from 5 years of experience within an organization to 30 plus years, in some cases? What was it that they had learned, and what did they know about themselves, and how they maybe reacted to it, and how they've changed even as a person as a result of what they'd experienced?
mm. Wow, it's fascinating. What kinds of lessons do you think there are to be gleaned from this research and all the work that you've been doing for leaders in particular? When it comes to I mean, you mentioned DNI and here in this country, and I think pretty much worldwide, there's a kind of a questioning of, what does that even mean anymore? And many people are calling for these kinds of programs to be nixed altogether. Others are saying we should do more, et cetera, et cetera. But there's this kind of acronym that's in the middle that's sort of seems to have lost a little bit of its meaning, and or at least people are not putting as much meaning to it as they perhaps used to. That's certainly what we're seeing here, and as a result, there's a question of why do these even exist? But in hearing you speak about your work and your research and seeing these very clear kind of differences and separations of people that are just part of a bias and where these organizations come from and how they were created, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think at this point in time are the lessons of all of this that leaders can take away and sort of say, this is how I'm going to lead an organization where we do feel a sense of belonging and that sort of thing? I know it's a big, it's a tall order, but
Yeah, and yeah. So I come into this with a view that um, I don't know that we're ever going to get perfection.
mm,
I don't think that's what most people are expecting. But what I think most people would um, absolutely want to be committed and loyal to an organization is an organization that does D&I in whatever capacity authentically, with
mm,
integrity, with leader integrity. And by that, I mean the stories that came up of, and almost everybody I spoke to was talking about the frustration of my organization. It, wants to promote its brand through D&I, or there's a little piece on its website, or they tick boxes, but when you push just the tiniest bit, it falls over. It was a house of cards and it's fallen over. And actually, what they'd much rather have is honesty. What they'd much rather have is authentic conversations, because I think we've all been in situations where we don't feel like belong. So if
mm,
we can access that, if we can feel how we felt when we didn't belong, there was a group, a team, a circle of friends, and we tried or didn't try because we didn't feel like we would be accepted. And how did that make us feel? And how did that maybe change us and our behavior? Then we can understand, okay, so let me hear your story. And I'm not just saying women or people of color. I think we all have stories. So let's create some really good dialogue where we understand one another and what our needs are. And then when organizational policies or, senior leaders say something, then let's do it out of being authentic to what our people need. Let's not, put in a prayer room, without understanding that a prayer room also needs washing facilities.
mm,
That's a tick
mm,
box exercise. But instead, if we spoke to someone who said, this is something that is deeply rooted to who I am, and here, here's what it means to me, and here's what I'm looking for, then do it from that perspective rather than from a, rushing to put something on our website or to say something to our employees. I think people can hear when it's disingenuous.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I've been thinking, because when you were talking about different organizations, I've been reflecting on the different initiatives and groups where you could actually see the profile of who that hire was, and almost like they were dipped in different colors, but they were almost like I don't want to be in trouble with branding people, but like almost like a Barbie and Ken, like they're clones of each other, and we don't go into the littlest details to find out their experiences. I think part of the disconnect with a lot of well-intended programs, they become labeled initiatives that happen someplace else. They happen in a conference room, people attend, or on a Zoom, and then it goes away, instead of thinking about all those little moments during your day where we may overtly and intentionally not being paying attention to how we're presenting to other people, or how we're listening, or how we've turned our body away from somebody because we think the person at the end of the table has more value than what this other human has been trying to struggle to say. So I think it's the practical part, like the maps or incentives, to really think about where is it me, and what can we do is on the grassroots level,
Yeah.
local level.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. For me, psychological safety is everyone's business. It's not a lead, it's not just a leader, it's not a team manager, it's not a CEO, it's not HR. All of us need to come in to every space, whether that's, one-on-one or a team meeting, even if we are not the leaders. It should be all of our business to make sure that if someone isn't being heard or if they've been cut off, we don't have to be aggressive. We don't have to be mean. We can simply say, I was really curious about what you were saying there, Julianne. Can I hear the rest of that? That's all, that's all it takes to kind of become an ally of someone who potentially is being excluded. And what we need to note is it's much harder. For example, most organizations have English as their primary business language. And if we think about if we were to go into an organization, I'm going to say Spanish because that's where I lived for a while, it's really hard to contribute quickly in a meeting where things are being said, we're having to translate that in our heads and then think how can I make my message heard, and the meeting's moved on. So just to notice, those spaces, and are we giving enough time or space early on to say the day before, a week before, here's the agenda, here's what we're going to be talking about tomorrow. Or let's break out into groups of twos and threes for the introverts, maybe that might
Mhm.
make it easier for them to speak up and feel heard. So there's lots of little ways in which we just can engage and try and get everyone to speak up. In the coffee lounge, we often find we have a group of people, and let's say they're from a German company, and five of them start speaking German in the coffee lounge, but there's that one person who maybe doesn't speak that language, and immediately they're excluded and they go about making their cup of coffee, and they come back into the main room because they can't join that conversation. So it's just noticing, as you say, Julianne, the little moments where we can engage and include. And it's so hard, right? Where our world is just moving faster and faster, and AI is coming in, and I have a friend who's the CEO of a small group hotel chain, and he's creating on AI their policies, write me a policy about this. So just things are moving at such a fast pace that that idea of being present and turning to
Mhm.
someone, or in a meeting putting phones down and really paying attention to the dynamics of the space, that's
Yeah.
becoming harder.
Yeah, yeah, and it doesn't help that we also, as humans, we have these unconscious biases that are unconscious, and so there's also the work of making that more conscious, and as people become more aware of it, technology doesn't necessarily help us, in terms of reinforcing that sort of awareness and learning. And you just kind of brought me back when you were talking about for anyone to think about when they've had that sense that they didn't belong,
Mm.
and I feel, and I agree with you. I mean, this is universal to everyone. I mean, can describe a lot of my school experience, but
Yeah.
I, high school especially, right? Who has not felt that at some point during those kinds of formative years, if not sooner than that. And then I was just thinking, I went to an international business school that took you to 3 different countries. And so there were different languages and people from all over the world that participated in the school. But it was very telling, just like what you were, the example you gave, the 5 people who speak the same language are hanging out together by the water cooler, and then there's one person who doesn't. We saw that immediately, and we were just in our 20s, but it comes naturally. People were gravitating towards the people who spoke the same languages, and that endured quite a bit until finally the third year, where there was a little bit more cohesiveness. But for 2 years out of 3, that's 2/3 of the program, you could really see these groups, and it was very difficult to move from one to another, even though the whole purpose of this was to bring people together and was for people to, even as we were learning these different languages and, learning different concepts in different countries and cultures, etc., it's still very much ingrained that, oh, that person's like me, I'm going to go there. So it's something I truly believe. From there, I sort of really saw, the value of actually making the effort of going towards someone that doesn't look like you, doesn't speak like you, doesn't have the same culture, et cetera, because it doesn't necessarily come naturally to everyone unless you're, an extrovert, et cetera, and that's outgoing. But these things have to be, to some extent, learned. And if you don't get those experiences, it may be harder to learn. So I do think that part of that is also leaders' responsibility to make sure that there are spaces where it is possible to learn about others, because we may not do it naturally. Just to say to people, yeah, just go and talk to that person, it'll be fine. That doesn't necessarily come naturally to everyone, and that's fine too. We shouldn't judge them for it. Anyway, I'm getting off my
The word
soapbox.
that comes to my mind is curiosity, right? So
Mm,
if we're just curious about other people's stories, what
mm,
what what have they lived? What have they experienced? I think that's super powerful. And one of the things I think I'm always, there's a saying for parents, the days are long and the years are short. And in Ashridge, I often say to groups, the days will be long. There's no apology. It will be tiring. We will be teaching you a lot. You will feel exhausted, but the week will be short. And
mm,
usually, 99% of our groups, by the end of a week or 3 or 4 days being together, they really feel connected. And I think they really feel connected because we've done exactly what you just said, Jerome. We've kind of introduced lots of opportunity, lots of space for them to open up to one another. And there's something about not only sharing and the connection, but also about vulnerability, where if we're able to be humble and not I think a lot of us in the workplace kind of want to go in and act self-confident, like we have all the answers, but frankly none of us can have all the answers. So if we're able to kind of have that sense of humility and curiosity, where we're able to say, gosh, these are uncharted waters and this part of the business is really struggling. And without all of your views, I don't think we're going to get the very best possible solution going forward.
mm, mm,
Those types of moments of trying to pull people in who I think most of us, if we're given, people are often surprised when it's a big town hall, they ask for views and everyone's quiet and they wonder why. For me, town halls are information
mm,
giving moments, and small group work is pulling people out and really getting the best of. You've hired them for a reason, right? So you want to bring the best out of them and ask them
mhm.
for their views and opinions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's hugely valuable. I want to get to the part of the episode where we ask you something about yourself and your own experience around and I know you've done this exercise before, but I'll ask it again. Can you tell us about an experience that has shaped who you are today, still kind of informs you and who you are?
Yeah, let me share with you a story, which is this is something that stayed with me for a long time. My middle daughter was 8, and she was sitting in the back of my car with a friend of hers, and they were giggling and whispering away, and I could hear them. And I heard my daughter's friend lean over and say to her, "I didn't used to like you, but I do now." And in all innocence, my
Hmm.
daughter said, "Oh, is it because I like Cheryl Cole and you don't?" Such a cute, sort of sweet 8-year-old thing to say. And this friend said, "No, it's because you're dark." And my heart absolutely sank. And I remember thinking, I don't know if can I say something without it ruining this newly emerging relationship, and where, why has she felt this? And oh my goodness, the big overriding feeling I had was, I know I had experienced that, and this is, 100 years ago. So how is my daughter still experiencing that? And that, I think, is that those sorts of moments are what led me to do my doctoral work, because I just so want to have, even if it's the tiniest chink, I want to have some impact on that world of equality.
Mm. Wow, beautiful. And there's so much to unpack in that story. I mean, but just a quick reflection on my part. Well, first of all, it's very moving because when you see the world through the lens of a child, that's, as you said, so innocent, etc. It's very hard to judge that. And so, even though there's a lot of things that you want to be judging, but it's a child who said
Yeah.
it, so they don't know better, et cetera, et cetera. That's what went through my mind. And then, of course, yeah, it's always interesting to me when we ask this question to see that sort of direct line one can make from something that happened years ago to what you're currently doing, and or what you started to do and are still sort of focused on. That kind of purpose that you have often originates back to something that happened a while ago. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, Jules.
Did your daughter ever ask why in that moment, or did she just take it as a given? Like,
She
okay,
didn't ask
move on.
why in the moment. She didn't ask why in the moment, but she shared several stories of a similar ilk all
Mm,
through her growing up years. And she her dad is white, I am Indian, and she still received quite a lot of discriminatory comments, both from sort of childhood friends, but also from teachers. So I think those moments for her started to shape in her teenage years, not wanting to look Indian, not wanting to confess that she's even part Indian. So, highlighting her hair. There was times when she wanted colored contact lenses, and we got through that, and now she is super proud of her heritage, of her part ethnicity, and goes out of her way to kind of share that that is her ethnicity. But it we talk about it a lot, how much it has influenced and impacted her, for good and for some of the bad. And that is, in essence, what came out of a lot of the work that I did with these people that I interviewed. Some of it has lasting negative legacy, and some of it is
mm.
super positive. The resilience that people talk about is a result of what they had come up against. And that's hugely positive. And there's other stuff that comes up for a lot of people.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm not going into it now, but like as you were describing things, I had like little photo moments in my head of different grade school classes and how teachers or nuns talk to certain students in the class, or
Yeah,
profiled them in a way. So there was a lot of small repetitive moments. And it happens in work too. When you have, I had one other
exactly.
person come to mind, which was this rather substantious man who used to roll his Rolex watch and open and put his hands back and lean, do the man spread at a meeting. And that was the symbol of how powerful men or leaders are supposed to talk in an organization. And
Yeah,
how do you compete with that when that's not my style or other women or people around the table? But he showed what was supposed to be the powerful leadership example, and what
yeah,
was doing, how was that getting received, and also what was doing with people, how people were treating him or weren't interacting with him. But he got away
exactly.
with it because it worked for him. So,
Yeah,
Mm. Yeah. Well, I wish we could talk for much, much longer, but I do want to maybe on a, I don't know if this is a good transition or not from the story we just heard, but something just came to my mind for people, maybe along the lines of what Julienne was just saying, when we think of the workplace and we think of all the interactions and, the things that might separate people, the things that might bring them together. I know that some people who listen to this podcast, are eager to hear some practical things as well in terms of how might I, either maybe on the one hand, how might I as a leader start to implement, these principles of psychological safety,
mm,
which are really at the heart of everything.
mm,
It would be hard to have a DNI program if you didn't have a sense of psychological safety well established in an organization. So that's on the leadership side.
mm,
What are some ways that a leader might start that inquiry?
yeah,
And then I'm also thinking of, maybe there are employees, to your point, Julian, who are faced with leadership that just it goes over their head. This is not something that's there. Maybe there are some subtle ways to advocate, for some small incremental changes where there is a feeling, okay, we're going towards something that's a little bit that's making not just those two or three leaders feel safe because they're comfortable, but actually is going towards making a few more people safe and a few more and a few more, et cetera.
mm,
Maybe those two things are directly attached, but I'm kind of thinking of these two
yeah,
aspects, the leader and the employee.
yeah. So we've already talked about humility, right?
Mm,
Particularly as a powerful leader, showing your own humility
mm,
is really important. We've talked about allyship. So
mm,
noticing who is not being included and finding little ways of making sure you embrace them in. I'm going to say a few more. So if you are a leader of a group, asking for dissent where people know you have a point of view, saying, I believe this. Tell me all the things that I'm not that
mm,
I haven't thought about. Tell me what our competitors might do if they had this strategy in their hands. If I sent this up to the board, what questions would they ask of me that I haven't yet thought about? So asking people for other points of view other than your own, people won't give them if you're a leader naturally. So asking for that is super,
mm,
super
mm,
powerful.
mm,
Equality and turn taking, I'd say, is something else. So really noticing. You don't have to say 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, but you can say, I'm going to be really conscious that everyone has a point of view or time to speak. So making sure that you kind of shut down the people who are always loud and um, speak their view, and bringing up people who don't. So making sure there is time for everyone. And then I would just say building trust. So one-on-one, trust is an individual thing. So one-on-one for you with each person, but also offering space in meetings for them to have a piece of human connectedness. So that can be as simple as, first 5 minutes, having different pairs each time go off and you have a theme each time, share a story when, whatever, whatever each time you might want to ask them to do.
Mm,
Those
mm.
moments create trust.
Yeah, that's great. And this really links back. Thank you for all those practical aspects, and it sounds very doable to me. And it also connects quite a bit with a few other of our episodes where we talk a lot about trust and how to create trust, how to build trust, and you've made a connection to those stories that one can hear, and using those experiences as leverage, really, in terms of making those points. Here's how I did not feel a sense of belonging, and we're not so different in a way, and these are the things that bring us together. So I think there's a lot for people to take away from this, and really want to thank you for your time today, Sona, and Julienne. Wondering if you have any other thoughts, reflections. I know we're getting towards the end of our time here.
I'm very much looking forward to seeing your thesis. And no, I'm thinking about people as I'm sitting here of all the names I mentioned before our recording of people I was talking to that are going to be delighted to read it. So make it available to us when you're done, and share your learnings, because it's not just a once in a while learning, it's an everyday learning. And I think these prompts and these things you're offering up are very important and helpful.
I love
Yeah.
that, Julienne. It's an everyday learning. I love that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Sona, and thanks, Jules, for being my wonderful co-host one more time. It's been a real pleasure. And I just want to remind our listeners that if you've been as inspired as we have by this session, you can certainly learn more about Sona and her work at Ashridge, and other things that she's been doing as well, in the episode notes today. You can go to narrative.com. That's NARATIV.com. That's where you'll find all of that information. You can also consider enrolling yourself and or your team in our group and one-on-one training programs, where we explore specifically people's stories, and how they link to their sense of purpose, their sense of meaning, sense of belonging, how you can do that in your organizations as well. We have a how-to method that you can learn, and that's really been quite life-changing for a lot of people. So invite you to check that out as well on narrative.com. And anything else that you want to share with us, we're always ready to listen to you. Get in touch with us. Always happy to hear any kind of feedback that you might have, and the kinds of wins that you're getting in your own life
Absolutely.
by practicing these tips. So thanks again, and I hope we'll see you all next time. And thanks again, Sona. Thanks again, Jules. And bye everyone.
Cheers. Bye.
For more information on the narrative listening and storytelling method and how it can help your business, go to narrative.com.